Today is February 13th, 2012. My name is Joe Bruckner. I'm a volunteer with the Atlanta History Center. And with me today is Ed Woods, who's also a volunteer with the Atlanta History Center. And we're honored to have with us John Walsh. John is an Army veteran, a veteran of the Vietnam War, and he's agreed to come and tell us about his experiences, both pre and post-military, but primarily his experiences in the service and his experiences in Vietnam. We're at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and this interview is part of the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. Mr. Walsh, thank you very much for coming down here today, and we're looking forward to hearing your story. Would you give us your full name and your current address?
Excuse me, my name is John Lister Walsh. I was born in Providence, Rhode Island, Lion Inn Hospital, like almost anybody else of that age group, in Providence, and I was born on October 17th, 1944.
Tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Most of my formative years were spent traveling in Catholic schools. My father was in the Navy until '54, so my first 10 years we followed him around mostly up and down the East Coast. He was East Coast Navy, stationed down in Boca Chica in the Keys in the 50s. Boca Chica in the Keys in the 50s, and also later on he served over in Norfolk, but primarily out of Quonset Point, Rhode Island. He was a pilot. Of course, I left Mom home to raise myself and my two sisters. We spent, as I said, most of my time in Catholic school. Towards the end, I ended up in public school, and then went off to Valley Forge Military Academy, junior college, spent 2 years there. Then I went to East Carolina. Actually ended up being called out of Vietnam, out of East Carolina when they drafted me. So I had an 8-year break, went back to East Carolina, and at that point I graduated from East Carolina was there 71 to 73. So I had a break, if you will, for 8 years. When I went back, I was, myself and another guy, we resurrected the East Carolina Veterans Club, and when I left and turned over the reign to him in 1973, we had more veterans in the Veterans Club than all the other Greeks on campus.
Wow.
We made a great social impact in the area. We were in charge of raising funds for all kinds of different charities, and I actually got selected as Who's Who in North Carolina for Young Executives, which was an honor. I never, quite frankly though, I never followed up on it because I didn't know if it was a scam or not, but I did get selected, so I was pretty happy about that.
Okay. Did you have other family members who were in the military in addition to your father?
My father, as I said, my father was in the Navy, World War II and Korean War. My mom was in the Marines in World War II, and I have an uncle, Donald Lister, who's on my mother's side. He was in the World War II. As I mentioned before, he received a battlefield commission, 2 Silver Stars, 3 Bronze Stars. So he was quite a powerful force at that time. On my father's side, there was another military man, my uncle Bill. He's a retired senior master sergeant from the Air Force. So yeah, I'm surrounded by military people.
What was your feeling and the feeling of your family when you got drafted?
That's kind of a funny question. There was elation because, well, now he'll get his act together, I guess, for lack of a better word. And the second one, of course, is no mother likes to see their son go to war. So even though there was all this military around us, there was still the anxiety, if you will, of the is he going to come back?
Yeah. Okay. Talk about your entry into the Army and the training you received, where you went, what you were trying to do, and any experiences you want to share about your training.
Well, when I was drafted in those days, you guys might remember when you got drafted, you kind of had a choice. You could stay drafted and be a grunt, or you could convert your draft status and become a regular Army. So I became a regular Army guy, RA 11440642, and I took my basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. After Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I went to Indianapolis, Fort Benjamin Harrison, as a 72 Charlie, which is a finance and dispersing specialist. It was there that I decided to go on and pursue my commission and go to Officer Candidate School and pursue a commission.
Okay. Talk about what you did from that point forward.
Well, once I was selected for Officer Candidate School, I was actually selected for the infantry OCS. Went on vacation over Christmas, came back, and the Army said they needed Signal Corps officers, so I was diverted from infantry OCS to Signal OCS. We were in the 3rd graduating class from Signal OCS. I ended up being a TAC officer at OCS. I was relieved of duty for excessive hazing, which seemed normal to me because I did what to other people what they did to me. Unfortunately, the IG walked in the mess hall one afternoon, and I was the one who became the scapegoat. But the colonel, being the colonel, said, "No problem, Walsh." So he made the supply officer didn't ship me out immediately. So about 6 months later, my orders came down to go to Vietnam for the first time, which was in March of '67.
Okay. How did your family feel about your going to Vietnam?
Well, again, they were proud of me that I was going to Vietnam because we were going to carry forth the Walsh name and supporting, the war effort that obviously, growing up in the Northeast, there's a lot of motherhood and apple pie, and so we were kind of continuing to fulfill that role. Because no one else in my family, from myself down, ended up in the military. No one else took that path that I took.
Yeah.
So they were pretty proud of that. They were very surprised when I decided to stay in the Army, but that's a whole other story. I deployed to Vietnam, as I said, in March of '67. Landed at Benoit, I believe it was Benoit, and from there I was sent up to the 4th Infantry Division. When I first got to the 4th Infantry Division, because I was a communications officer. I graduated from Signal OCS. I was assigned to the 124th Signal Battalion as a platoon leader in a signal company.
Where was this?
That was in Dragon Mountain, which was where the 4th Infantry Division was headquarters, which was outside of Pleiku, about 15-20 miles outside of Pleiku. They called the base camp Campanari, or it was Campanari later, but at that time it was called Dragon Mountain.
Would you describe just generally where Pleiku is, either
Pleiku is in the Central Highlands. We were outside of Pleiku. As a matter of fact, during the Tet Offensive, the 4th Engineer Battalion was actually deployed into Pleiku. We ran out of tanks, so we were using, if you can imagine this, we were using bulldozers with blades down, almost down. They had to be off the ground in order to move as a blocking force while the troops were coming in behind. It was kind of an exciting thing to hear about. Obviously, we didn't see it.
But before we go further, go back to your entrance into Vietnam. When you got in country, what was your first impression after you landed and got off the plane?
Hot. What am I doing here? When do we get to a unit? I need to get focused. I need to figure out what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it, and how I'm going to get it done. It was more of a mission-oriented. I know that sounds kind of bullheaded, but that uncertainty just, the more uncertainty you could relieve from the situation you were in, the better and the more comfortable you felt, and you felt the more effective you could be.
Okay. Now, moving ahead, now you're in Pleiku, and
Okay, so I get sent up there, and I decided that being a platoon leader in a radio platoon was not something I wanted to do. And they were looking for someone to run the general's mess. So Colonel Pratt, who was Major Pratt at the time, was the XO of the battalion. He heard that I had some background in clubs, which I did as an enlisted man. I was a bartender at the NCO club out at Fort Bend Harrison, pick up some extra cash. I had also worked my way through school at East Carolina as a bartender and as a waiter. So that's probably more experience than most people had or would admit to, so okay, you're in charge of the general's mess. So I went down and I was in the general's mess, and I realized real quick, which it didn't take a real bright bulb to do it, that I was in the wrong place. That even if I was going to stay in the Army one more year, rubbing shoulders with general officers and with full colonels was not my forte. I was still a pretty rough diamond, and it needed to be polished a lot better than what I had, what I was equipped with. So I went to see the Chief of Staff, Colonel Miller, and I said, "Sir, you need to get me out of here. I'm not going to be a benefit to the Army if I stay here. I'm going to develop bad habits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." So he got me a job down in the Aviation Battalion. The worst job I ever had in my life was being a non-rated officer, meaning I did not have wings, in an aviation battalion. And I can tell you right now, there were 4 of us. There was myself, who was a signal officer. I was in charge of the authentication tables. I was also in charge of the indigenous personnel. I was also in charge of paying the troops. I was in charge of the supply room. I was in charge of headquarters detachment as the quote, an extra duty. I don't even get CO credit for that. So you can imagine this line, these duties kept going. Then there was an S4 by the name of Lenny Helgeson. He ended up, he was non-rated. Don Kiewit, who was the S2 Pathfinder, he was non-rated, and then Mr. Burton was non-rated. He was the motor pool officer, the warrant officer in charge of the motor pool. So the four of us pretty much caught every single detail, including guard duty, multiple times because the aviators were not available because they might have to go fly a plane. I'll be as PC as possible. So when I left Vietnam, I had full intentions of getting out. My father-in-law at the time, he and I were going to buy a Chevrolet dealership on Maniote Island, North Carolina. And we decided after doing our due diligence that there wasn't enough money going to be generated to support two families. So I said, oops, I better circle back. So when I came back from my first tour in Vietnam, I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne, 82nd Signal Battalion, again this time as an XO because I was a senior first lieutenant. And they didn't really have XO slots, but there was the only place they could put a senior first lieutenant. When I made captain, I got moved down to the battalion headquarters as the S1/adjutant. I also went to jump school, where upon my beginning of my second week, I broke my shoulder. Goofing around, trying to do PLFs in the pit. Anybody who's been to jump school knows what I'm talking about. I went straight from my feet to my shoulder, and that was it. Done. Thanks very much. Good night. So I had the privilege of serving in the 82nd Airborne Division as a non-paratrooper, or affectionately known as a leg. However, because of the way I purported myself, very, very few people even knew that I wasn't airborne. So the fact is that I was selected as one of two officers in the division to be the general's aide. When I went up for the final interview, I said, Colonel Ringler, who later went on to become General Ringler, he was in charge of 18th Airborne Corps, I said, sir, I'm still a leg. They haven't fixed my shoulder. Needless to say, there were some people in that chain of command who had to pay the price when they found out that Walsh made it that far. So Captain Scott immediately got the position. After that, I went back to the 82nd, and then while at a seminar put on by the OPO, Officers Placement Divisions, I guess, OPD I think it is, I came across Colonel Pratt, who I mentioned earlier as Major Pratt. He was one of the officers in charge up there. He said to me, he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm over in the 82nd Signal Battalion, 82nd Signal. He said, had they given you a command? And I said, no, not yet. He said, I have a command for you. I said, well, sir, you have to ask Colonel Palmer, who was my boss. And so, as those things go, one colonel yelled across the hall to the other, across the bar to the other colonel, and the next thing I knew, I was being processed out of the 82nd Airborne over to what we call the leg side of post. I was a 23-year-old captain, and I took charge of the largest signal company in the United States Army. It was called the 333rd Signal Company. It is still in existence today. Its mission was to establish and support 5 Army area communication centers. It was supposed to have over 350 people. I ran into some of my NCOs later on, and they said, you know, Captain, the only reason we really did any work for you is that we fell in love with your enthusiasm. You know, it's one of those things, you know, I had all this enthusiasm to convince them because they knew I didn't have any experience. I honest to goodness, guys, I barely shaved. I could go. I went through officer candidate school. I won a contest. I went 33 days, I think it was, without shaving in officer candidate school. I just didn't have that face. But anyways, it was a great time over there in the 333rd Signal Battalion as part of the 35th Group. Got to deploy down to a Synclan exercise, which is an unbelievable exercise, joint service exercise out of Puerto Rico, over the Roosevelt Roads, responsible for establishing the communications back to Fort Bragg, and we had a good time establishing the communications. So it was a lot of fun. After that, I was selected to go to the career course up in Fort Monmouth. So I went to the career course. Graduated from the career course, went back to Vietnam. So my second tour in Vietnam was 1970, August of 70 to August. Actually, I left in July of 71. I was a company commander for the year that I was there. My company was Charlie Company, 369 Signal Battalion. Headquartered in Montagnard, the battalion was headquartered in Montagnard, but I was in Canto.
And would you describe where those
Sure.
are?
Canto is in the Delta. I had the responsibility of establishing and maintaining communications for 11 isolated communication sites scattered throughout the Mekong Delta. Rockjaw, Kamau, Soktrang, Baklu, I can't remember all of them. But we established the long lines communications as well as the call home circuits where people would go into the USO up in Saigon or whatever, they would back channel to us and then we'd take them back to the US. It was a great assignment. It was the best challenge I ever had. I was supposed to have 12 captains, I had one. I was supposed to be a major, I was a captain. Ended up with 5 officers and some E7s who were out there on the sites where I was supposed to have lieutenants. And it was the best assignment I've ever had. It was the best maturation process I ever had. It was the biggest sense of fulfillment I've ever had in my life because between learning the sense of urgency in 82nd Airborne, because I was there during Martin Luther, when Martin Luther King was killed, and we were having to keep battalions on standby in order to go and fight the riots. I don't know if you guys remember that or not. Between that sense of urgency and being a company commander in Vietnam for a year, you learn how to prioritize, you figure out what's important. And even though I was only 24 years old with all that responsibility, I'm going to tell you, I loved it. I loved it. Towards the end of that tour in '71, the communications people were starting to withdraw from Vietnam. And at that point, several of us were asked to take on the additional duty as a contracting officer representative. And what we were asked to do was to monitor the performance of Federal Electric Corporation, excuse me, Federal Electric Corporation, who had gotten a contract. So 11 of my sites, out of the 11 of my sites, I can't remember exactly what it was, 11 or 12, but out of those sites, 6 were chosen to be manned by civilians. So we took them initially, we took them from Page Electric, we operated them for 10 or 12 years, and then we gave them back to civilians.
Now, was this a U.S. company that was going to take over what you were doing?
Federal Electric Corporation, yes, very, very large company. So we had Federal Electric Corporation there, and then I also was the contracting officer representative for the calibration team that was assigned to my site. And then there was a tactical signal battalion in the Delta at the time, and he was ordered to give me the responsibility and take over the dial central offices, which is where the signal goes when you make a phone call. You go through the dial central office off into wherever you're making that call. So I took over 3 of those, and I took over his long line. So I had more people and more responsibility as a 24-year-old captain than this lieutenant colonel had as a battalion commander. He had a lot of problems with that. He and I would have some spirited conversations, as you can probably well imagine, about that. And I said, "Sir, I didn't do this. This is not my fault. You know, I'm just asking for your help to make it work." So I loved the challenge. We had a great group of people. Contrary to what you hear about the people in Vietnam, it was not the kids I had trouble with. The most trouble I had with people in Vietnam were the senior non-commissioned officers.
Really?
And it wasn't drugs, it was booze.
Huh.
It was booze.
Huh.
And to the point where I even tried to get one kicked out of the Army. I just happened to be in Saigon when he brought a convoy from the Delta all the way up to Saigon. It's about an 8-hour trip. He opened up the door of the dude's staff and literally fell on the ground. He was so drunk. I tried to get him barred from re-enlistment and thrown out of the Army. And I'm the one who got his butt in trouble because when I went before the general, he said, "I understand you're trying to get Sergeant," it's okay to say his name, Sergeant Poole out of the Army. And I said, "Yes, I am." And he told me the story of what he was told, and I told him my story, and which basically was that I had asked Sergeant Poole to do something. He decided he didn't like it. I had a rule in my battalion, in my company. If you didn't like what I told you, we're not going to go to a direct order. We're going to go in the back, and we're going to go have a fight. And Sergeant Poole lost. And he challenged me twice, and he lost both times. So the general felt that there was a personality conflict that arose out of these fights. And I said, "No, ask some of the other people that I had fights with." He said, "There's no personality conflict. That's just the way that we did it in my unit." I mean, I was a young kid, and that's just the way I felt was the best way to do it. Well, anyways, this came up, and the general looked me right in the eye, and he said, "Well, Captain Walsh, I'm not going to allow you to go forward with this bar from re-enlistment and this removal of Sergeant Poole from active duty because it's obvious that you have a personality conflict with Sergeant Poole." And I looked at the general and I said, "General, there's no such thing as personality conflict. And that's when my colonel grabbed me like a child. He put his hand on my back of my neck and said, "John, I think it's time for you to get out of here." But the fact remains is there's no such thing.
He said what?
He said, "I think it's time for you to get out of here."
Okay.
Because I was getting ready to
Yeah.
speak my piece to the general. And I wasn't being disrespectful, it's true. There's no such thing as a personality conflict. If the guy outranks you, you do it or you pay the price. It doesn't matter where you are in the chain. This sergeant happened to be below me, so that's what we did. But the best thing that came out of that whole thing was I had a learning experience from it, number one. But the second thing was the rest of the battalion, the rest of my company knew that if I was right, I'd go to the mat. And if I was wrong, I'd take my medicine. And in this case, I was right and took my medicine anyway. So, it's the same old thing.
Yeah.
But anyways, so that's the only issue I ever had with any of the troops in Vietnam. I mean, I had a great group of guys, great group of guys. And I worked for a colonel by the name of Colonel Ingram, Harvey Ingram. And Harvey was my battalion commander at Fort Bragg when I had the 333rd Signal Battalion. He was a man ahead of his time. If you can imagine, in 1969, when I took command, he believed in the salt and pepper concept. And every one of his companies, he had 5 companies plus battalion headquarters, had to have a black man and a white person in charge. If you were a white company commander, you had a black First Army. In his case, he was a white battalion commander. He had Sergeant Major Anderson, who was a black one. Now here's the funny part about it, boys. Both of them were from Alabama.
Huh.
And he carried that thing through, and I'm telling you, the results were phenomenal, because you couldn't get one person to whimper about this or whimper about that because of the way that the battalion was balanced. I mean, it was a great thing. When he found out I was in Vietnam the second time, we found out because I picked up the phone and called him. He had one of his captains come over and get me, and then that's how I got down to the Delta. So I basically went to the Delta within a week of when I landed in Vietnam the second time and left. I spent my whole year down in the Delta as a company commander and as a contracting officer representative.
Wow.
Again, the best challenge, the greatest adventure I ever had.
Did you have any dealings with the civilian population, your first and second tour?
Yes, if we go back to the first tour, I was when I got down to the aviation battalion, I was the person in charge of indigenous personnel. As a matter of fact, the MP stopped my maid at the gate when we were doing the piastre exchange. Guess who had all the? She had all the piastres. I mean, she had all the bucks. So, anyways, I had to go up and talk to the CID about that. So yes, I did have I did have interface with them. The second tour was kind of interesting that you would ask that, because towards the end of the second tour, I didn't have much interaction with civilians at all until towards the end of the second tour. At the end of the second tour, they didn't want officers to drive their vehicles. They wanted us to get drivers. So we had to hire Vietnamese, because they didn't want any, as an attorney you can relate to this, they didn't want any outstanding litigation to be on the books, because we as Americans injured or, God forbid, killed an innocent Vietnamese because we were driving and something happened.
Yeah.
So we hired civilians at that point. Yeah, we did have that, but that was the only interaction. And my calibration team were civilians. And also, when I became the contracting officer representative, they were civilians, but they were not nationals.
Right.
They were basically Americans or Filipinos that came over to fulfill a contract for the Federal Electric Corporation.
What was your impression of the Vietnamese civilians that you dealt with? Their attitude, at least the feeling they expressed about either the war or about the military, or any significant memories you have about dealing with the civilians?
I would have to say, when I was an S5 officer in the aviation battalion, that was another additional duty, by the way. When I was the S5 officer, and we went out into the Montagnard villages, okay, I just thought of that as you said that. I thought that was a very uplifting and opportunity. I felt bad. The village that we were supporting and trying to help, unfortunately, one of our GIs dropped a grenade. The chief's son picked up the grenade and blew off his arm, got his arm blown off. But other than that, we had a great relationship with the mountain units, and that's a group of people that I don't think get enough credit for their participation and how much they helped the GIs, us, how much they helped us. My second tour, as I said, I didn't have much interaction with civilians. You know, the only civilians that you would see would be, obviously, would be some of the cleaning people, maybe bartenders.
Yeah.
But you know, that was about it. That would be on base, but that was about it. You know, I mean, you just we didn't spend our time going downtown or anything like
Yeah.
that. So I don't have any kind of interaction I can tell you about that.
Okay. What other experiences, if any, do you want to talk about in connection with your second tour?
Well, I think the second tour, as if I didn't have enough going on, I was hanging around with the Cords people. I don't know if you remember
Yeah.
the Cords people.
But explain what the Cords people are for the purpose of.
Well, I was sitting here trying to run that acronym through my head, and I can't. All I remember is something about development.
Yeah.
They were responsible for civilian development of civilian
Right.
opportunities or something like
Right.
that. And you may remember Colonel Franklin. Colonel Franklin was part of that group. He was headquartered down in outside of Rockjaw, actually, as an ARVN advisor. And General Cushman at the time, Franklin was the brigade commander for John Calley's company, and Cushman was the commanding general when that whole thing went down. And it was General Cushman who said that they would not hold Colonel Franklin, and I can't remember the lieutenant colonel in between there, responsible. The only person they went after was John Calley, the Lieutenant Calley. I know I got to raise it up again, but anyways, the Cords recruited me, and I was shocked. I was shocked that they wanted to do anything, but what they were looking for is they were looking for someone to go, a communications person, which was my specialty, to go over to Cambodia and play the game over there, and I'll just keep it at that because I don't know where that is as far as being able to say anything about it. But the problem is that when I did the first interview, I was pretty excited about it, but when I went to the second interview, Cords was cutting back. And so they couldn't offer me a career path. All they could offer me was a contract. Meantime, the Army had offered me 2 years at East Carolina, where I could finish my diploma, full pay and allowances, they paid for the schooling, and I just couldn't pass that up. It was a great opportunity. So instead of doing the 6 month tour like most people, but don't have the college, that they didn't have the college degree, they went back and they finished it in 6 months. Colonel Ingram again came. He left Vietnam and he went up to be in charge of Signal Officers Assignment Branch. And so he said, "Well, you've paid your dues. Let's see what we can do for you. Where do you want to go?" And I said, "I'd love to go back and get my college education." He was not aware I didn't have my college education either. So I was able to go to East Carolina for 2 years, full pay and allowances. So when I left there, that's when I went over to Italy, and I was assigned to Naples, Italy.
Oh.
So while in Naples, Italy, I had 3 primary assignments. The first assignment I had was the Assistant S3 for the Communications Command. Worked for a guy by the name of Major Corp. I later left there and went on to become the Deputy Commander of the War Headquarters. That's a big title, but basically what I was someone who was the fall guy in case the colonel or the major wasn't there. I was the next in command. You know, we didn't do much there, but I mean, we were responsible for the underground complex that exists in southern NATO in case the balloon ever does go up down there. And then my last job, which was the most rewarding job, was again as a company commander. I was responsible for fleet broadcast, radio and receiver site. So I stayed as a commander there. I won't say, they don't think they're called companies, but as a commander there. That was a multinational situation where I had UK, US, Italian, Greeks, and Turks. And I happened to be on duty also when the Middle East broke up, so I had to get my Greeks and Turks off list. They couldn't be on the same. They couldn't be on the same shift because of the political things that were happening.
What was that operation about? Explain.
It was about providing telecommunications support to the fleet.
Okay.
We had radio site, we had a receiver site, we had a transmitter site, and the transmitter site was a field that had large antennas, so that when the subs would come up and they'd do a burst, we would receive that burst, and we would make sure that traffic got to the right places. It was quite a learning experience because, you know, operating with the Navy, Army, Air Force, and Marines, you got that experience. You know, on the civilian side, I had civilian techs who were helping me on the telecommunications side. I had Italian Carabinieri, who were the cops who were providing security for my sites, my 3 sites. And so I got a flavor for everything, you know, and I got to really get out there and mingle with the Italians and have a great time. I lived in an Italian in an Italian community.
What was the name of the town in Italy?
The name of the town outside there is called Lago di Patria, which is about 20 miles north of Naples.
Okay.
Lived in a duplex, if you will. Up on my roof, I could get up on the roof and look out and see the Mediterranean across the Dimensiana. It was really nice, really, really nice. I mean, it was a good job, it was a fun job, and yet we worked hard. We worked hard. State of the art was a online, real-time Olivetti computer. So when we would have major exercises going on in the Mediterranean, we had to watch the message count, because if the message count got too high, we had to transfer the messages up to work where we had manual operation, where we had somebody taking a message from this side and pulling it off and putting it over this side. And let me tell you something, that was a hair-raising experience, because you never knew if the message was going to get to us.
Yeah.
But it was a great time. And the people over there, I mean, there's a man by the name of Guillermo Morocco, who was a civilian counterpart to me. I tried to get he and his wife and family to come back to the U.S. with me. We were going to open up a car dealership. He was a relatively wealthy man, and at that time, if you look back in history books, you'll see that communism was just starting to come out of the industrial places of Bologna and Milan, and started to come south. And they were hitting Naples, and because Mr. Morocco had valuable assets such as a couple of apartment buildings and some businesses, he was concerned he may become a target. But because of this, for various personal reasons, he couldn't come back with me. Yeah. I went back there 15 years later, picked up the phone, Guglielmo, Giovanni. Boom, next thing you know, we're back. We're meeting them, we're having fresh fish, we're down on the waterfront having a great time. So it's a great friend.
Oh, wow.
Great friend.
Wow.
So those are the kind of things that you establish when you're in a service, that if you'll take time to do it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when I was at East Carolina. Even though I was a captain in the Army, I joined the JCs. I said, what are you doing here? You're a captain in the Army. I said, I want to change the attitude of civilians towards the military.
Good.
We're just like you guys. It's just we go to work differently. That's all.
Good.
And you know, and that was a great time
Right.
as well. I may find it hard to believe, but I was in charge of the entertainment portion of it.
I'm not surprised.
We had a great time, you know. So then after Italy, I came back and I went to a communication engineering school, which was the toughest school I've ever been to in my life. I got my master's degree in 1 year at night school while working full time. And everybody says, how'd you do that? I said, well, you just put your head down and just go to work. The electronics course that I went to was tougher than that. We had 34 core courses we were taking at least 3 at a time, and we had to finish that course, I think, was 7 months. It was an incredibly tough course. Yeah. But when you finished it, you felt good about it. You know, I mean, we covered all kinds. We covered satellite, we covered all, and you felt good about it. But when I graduated from there, in the typical Army wisdom, they sent me to be an advisor to the reserves. So they spent all this time draining my brain, racking up, you know, study hours, to go up and be part of what's called Readiness Region 5, which is out of Chicago. It operated a 5-state area, 5th Army, which is headquartered in Chicago, working for a guy by the name of General Healy, and that's where George McCoy used to work for General Healy as well, a member of our group. Yeah. General Healy at that time was one of the most decorated generals in the United States Army. Spent 6 years in Vietnam. He's quite a general. Quite a general. And so, you know, he that was another good experience because we intermingled with the civilians. Yeah. So we're down there teaching people. We're teaching reservists how to be soldiers. And I liked it so much that I got out. In March of '80, I got out of the service and I joined the Guard. And General Phipps, who was the Adjutant General of the state of Illinois at that time, said, you know what, Walsh, I want to give you a battalion. I said, sir, I'm only a major. I just got off active duty. He said, I don't care. He said, I want to give you a major. I said, sir, I mean a battalion. What about the major promotables and what about the lieutenant colonels? He said, you know this company. It was a company at the time, and I had to take the company and make it a battalion. So we were headquartered at 5900 North Broadway up in Chicago, right at the end of Hollywood Boulevard. And we took that up to, I think the head count at one time was over 700, if I remember, it was over 700 troops. So we grew that. We had a great time. And I stayed there for about 1.5 years. And then the general admitted, the colonel, the full colonel that I worked for, Artie Weller, admitted that he just couldn't take any more heat. That The major promoters and the full colonels, I mean light colonels, wanted that battalion. So he called me up and asked me if I'd step aside. I said, sure. I was living in Dallas at the time. He said, I can take the fact that you were an RA guy, but I can't take the fact that you don't live in the state anymore. So he told me that, he asked me if I would step aside. I said, sure, sir, no problem. Thank you for the opportunity. He wanted to make me the S3. I said, sir, that's not a very good thing to do. He said, why not? I said, sir, I was the advisor to this company. I formed the battalion. I was the battalion commander. Now you want to put me in as the S3. You think that lieutenant colonel is going to have any kind of confidence that he's doing a job without them coming to me? I said, sir, we need to avoid this. And sure enough, it didn't turn out well. So I left, joined the 85th Maneuver Division, and stayed there the rest of the time that I was in the Guard.
Okay.
So I left the Guard in '88, got off active duty, got out of the reserves in '88, and at that point I became a civilian.
I want to go back and ask you a couple of questions about your first and second tour. What was the biggest difference you saw in the time you were over there the first time and the time you were in Vietnam the second time?
My maturity.
Okay.
I was someone who thought I had all the answers when I went over there as a second lieutenant. Not even close. Yeah. Not even close. I approached things in ways that I never should have done it. I mean, I was immature. I was ill prepared to be over there and acting in some of the capacities that they put us into. As opposed to when you went back the second time, you had a little chance for maturity. You've been around the block. You've seen some things. You've matured. You know, your skin's got a little thicker, and you look at life a lot different.
And your second tour, you said one of your responsibilities was commanding the group that would transfer calls from Vietnam to the United States. And I know that one of the niceties of being in Vietnam, occasionally, if you're in the right place, is a trooper you could call home.
Yeah, and those circuits were called the call home circuits.
Describe how that worked. And
well, basically, you go to a USO facility. Now, the USO might be a tent. It might just be a couple of phones hanging from a tree. They would go through a switchboard. That switchboard would then be connected to another way, and then it would end up in my facility. And from my facility, we had the microwave and the troco. We would then take it out across the long lines network and back to the U.S.
Did you handle all the calls, or just a
majority of them?
Majority of them.
I couldn't tell you if I handled 50% or 75%, but I know that when those circuits went down, I better be someplace close, making sure that they were getting repaired and brought back up again.
So you were pretty much responsible for a little bit of touch of home for the soldiers when they could call.
Right. The biggest problem I have with call home circuits was getting my guys not to abuse them. Yeah. Because it's late at night, they're sitting in these air conditioned huts, and well, let's call so and so. Well, let's call so and so. So that was a challenge for me as a commander, to make sure they didn't abuse it.
When you returned, well, both times, how were you treated by the civilians in the United States?
Well, in 1968, when I got off the plane in SeaTac, I got spit on. Okay. Not very well. Not very well. Now, understand something. I was still a little thin-skinned, and I was still an Irish hothead. Okay. So some of the things I brought upon myself. But the one issue that I'll never ever forget, the spitting issue I got past. That didn't bother me as much as the next story I'm going to tell you. I went into a VFW, and I was waiting for a friend of mine to meet me there. And the guy looked at me and he said, "What are you doing in here?" And I looked at him and I said, "I came in for a drink." He said, "You're not a veteran." I said, "Excuse me?" I said, I just left the 4th Infantry Division. And I said, "We just finished the Tet Offensive." So he started testing me and challenging me, and he said, "Well, I don't believe you. Get out of here." Well, I proceeded to pick up a bar stool and have some different conversations. So when I got thrown out, I said, that's too bad. That's too bad they feel that way. That's obviously not what I really said, but that's the way I was feeling in my heart. I've never been back to a VFW. Right. I won't do anything. I won't have anything to do with a VFW. That had more impact on my life than anything else when someone denied me the right to tell the truth. Jeez. And then physically throw me out of this facility. Now, am I carrying a chip on my shoulder? Probably. Should I have buried it by now? Probably. But I don't see any reason. You know, I mean, I don't even, it's so far back in my memory banks that I
Yeah.
even forgot about it until a couple minutes ago when you said, tell us about you coming back. Now, the second time I came back, actually, there's one more story about the first time. First time, we're sitting, myself and this guy, Captain Walters. Captain Walters is a West Point graduate. He was the company commander of Charlie 2nd and 503rd, who was the only company, I believe, that did a combat jump in Vietnam. I don't hold me to those numbers, but I believe that's the only thing. And he said, John, we did such a bad job. We staked out that LZ for 3 weeks, and we still had, out of a 110-man infantry company that jumped, we still had 80% of the people were either killed or wounded in some fashion or another. He said, isn't that terrible? I said, yes, it is. And we were talking about it. So we're sitting there waiting for the plane to come in. Our plane, we can see the plane land. About that time, this is Cam Bay. They hadn't heard a shot fired in anger. Guess what happened? The perimeter lights up. Yeah. So we run back to the officers' club. That's how we're going to protect ourselves. We ran back to the officers' club and we waited. But I'll never forget that as long as I live. When Captain Walters told me that story. You know, they secured that LZ for 3 weeks and still had that kind of a volatility with the people involved. But anyway, so then we came back and then we had the issue at SeaTech. But again, there was a lot of stuff that was going on in those days that you just kind of go blow it off. Nobody knew.
Have you ever had reunions with any of your units that you were served with?
No, I don't intend to. Nothing bad, nothing good. I just don't have. I don't have the willingness to participate because, again, kind of like my anxiety of coming here for this interview, I really don't think I have anything to offer the conversation. So it'd be, oh, do you know something? I don't like to play that game. I like to have some meaningful conversations. Obviously fun conversations as well. But as you guys all know, there's a lot of our comrades who had some very bad experiences over there, and consequently, they have some stories that they want to get off their chest. No matter how many times they've told them, they still can't get over it for all the reasons that, thank goodness, I lucky enough that didn't happen to me. Yeah. So no, I never choose to participate in any of those things.
Talk a little bit about what you did after you left the military. It's in your civilian career.
Well, my civilian career, when I first left the military, I became a systems engineer for GTE. I was designing large telephone systems for GTE. And I will never forget this engineer for GTE came up to me and grabbed my hand one day and he says, "You need to slow down." I looked at him and I said, "Why is that, sir?" He said, "Every once in a while we hire somebody like you, a tiger, I think is the term to use, and we let you run around the plant." I was over in North Lake in Chicago. He said, "We let you run around the plant and burn your hands, and then you become just like us." And I said, "First of all, there's not enough fires, and second of all, I'm not going to stay if that's the case." So I left. I left GTE. I left it for a second reason, though. GTE is very, very pro-military. They hired 2 lieutenant colonels, doing less than I was doing, but they got higher pay because I was only a major. Now, they denied all that. They denied that to this day. They would deny it. Yeah. But the fact is, they got these 2 assignments, and they went to give me another assignment. I said, "Okay, then I want this much money." And they said, "We can't do that because you can't go from the position you're in to that position." I said, "Yes, you can." I said, "I'm going to resign, and then I'm going to reapply 2 weeks from now, and then you're not taking me from this position, you're moving me up to a new position." And Mr. Murphy looked at me and said, "John, we just can't do that." I said, "Fine." So I left GTE, went on and became a regional communications manager for FMC Corporation. And we installed the first non-bail nationwide network in the United States. So we had 3 locations. I was responsible for 2 of them. I was responsible for the San Jose location and for the Philadelphia location. And I'll spare you all the details, but needless to say, this project typically would have taken about a year and a half to cut over. We cut over in 7 months. We cut it over under budget. During that time, I got to meet some people, and they said, "You shouldn't be an engineer. You need to be a salesman." This guy's name was Jim Phillips and Bob Bozeman. Bob Bozeman at one time was involved in politics in Texas. He's an SMU graduate. He was president of alumni down there, and he built, one of his jobs before that, he built ballot machines, voting machines. And he said, "You definitely need to be in sales." And I said, "Okay." So I joined that firm as a salesman. So I gave up being an engineer, became a salesman, and I've never looked back. I had more fun as a salesman than I ever had as an engineer. One of the interesting things, though, Jim Phillips, who was a reservist, he was a pilot in the Air Force, passed me over for promotion. And I went to him and I said, why did I not get that VP position? You know I've earned it, I've sold blah, 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 blah. I gave him all the reasons why. He said, well, you remember that time you had that argument with so-and-so? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I think that's due to your emotional instability from Vietnam. And I looked at him and I said, Jim, you know what? I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to accept what you tell me, but do me a favor, please put that on a piece of paper for me. It took him about a week and a half before he came back to me and says, no way am I putting on a piece of paper. And for the obvious reasons, he knew what I was going to do with it.
Yeah.
And so we parted, and I went on, and I have done 5 startup companies. I did an international company called US Dialtone, myself and 2 other people. We were doing what's called callback, where we'd go into foreign countries. I established an 800 network, and we'd go into foreign countries. They would dial our switch in New York, our switch would recognize their telephone number, and it would go back and dial them, and then they could dial anywhere in the world and beat the PTT process,
yeah,
the public telephone telegraph process. I had another, I was president of another company, which was a publicly traded company. Actually, I was president of that company twice. And the second time we had a 9-node internet network in Australia. We had our major sales office was in Sydney, and our tech center was up in Darwin. We had a technology center over in Kuching, Malaysia, which actually has a larger gross national product. It produces more gross national product than Kuala Lumpur. And with that group there, we were going to do distant learning, because I don't know how, if you obviously know how many islands there are over in the Philippines. A lot of these places have absolutely no communications. We were going to go ahead and have a satellite shoot up and come back down to these little places we're going to pick off and have flat screen TVs, or have TVs so that we can teach them distant learning. At the same time, we had a telephone company over in the Philippines, which we had in Manila and also in down south, I think. And then we had a telephone company. The telephone company. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyways, so that was a great opportunity. Unfortunately, some things did not go correctly, and I was advised by my attorney to get out of the company, so I left that company. I got into real estate about 16 years ago. Worked for a RE/MAX franchise. Enjoyed that a lot. Tried to buy one of those franchises, couldn't do it, so I bought a Realty Executives franchise. I kept that franchise for 5 years, and about 3 years ago, I merged that company with Metro Brokers. And so now I'm back to being an agent as opposed to being a broker owner.
Okay.
There's some other things that I did I'm trying to think of. But that's basically, I spent my first 36 years in telecommunications, and then my last 16 have been in real estate. But there was some overlap.
Yeah.
There was some overlap between the communications, because it was part-time, because I had left it and went back as a consultant.
Okay.
But I had a lot of fun in that business. I watched a lot of companies come up in the telecommunications business. A funny story, when my father got off active duty in the Navy, he worked for a telephone company. He was a pole lineman before he went in, before he got drafted into the Navy in '42. He retired from the telephone company. And when I got out of the telephone business in 2001, I think our total combined service between the two of us was 60 years. I think it was 60 years total between the two of us.
You saw a lot of changes in that industry, didn't you?
Yeah, but and I know that your background is over there with them, but the only 2 things that really changed is choice.
Yeah.
Choice and access are the only 2 things that change. Everything else is the same.
Right.
You still have, now, as you know, now we get to choose our carrier, and we get to figure out how we want to access the network. Other than that, everything's the same.
Yeah.
You're still going to put it in someplace, you're going to take it out someplace, and how fast you want to get it there.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, nobody wants to talk about it, but that's how simple it is, but that's it, yeah. Yep.
Well, you've had an interesting career, both militarily and civilian life, because you've done so many different things.
I made a promise to myself that I would not allow myself to be put in a box. That if you looked up my definition of John Walsh and what he's done in life, you wouldn't say he got up every morning, with all due respect to my dad, God bless him, and went to the telephone company for 36 years. And then he woke up and he went one day and he went to work for Cook, and he passed away while he was still a right-of-way engineer at the telephone company, but now he's a contractor instead of working for Bell. That's not my expertise. I want to challenge. I want to take the challenge on as quick as possible. The companies that I had, I tried to design them so that they were going to be for sale within 3 to 5 years. for two reasons. One, because my boredom with them would probably be in full swing by then. And secondly, by that time, you've probably reached the maximum amount of money they're going to be worth, and so you move on. Yeah, we've been down to Wall Street with one of the companies that I had. We went down to Wall Street, we raised capital on Wall Street. That was fun. We raised over $15 million, going around to different brokerage firms and doing presentations. I mean, people would not believe the way Wall Street's run. I mean, if you haven't been to Wall Street to raise capital, you'd never believe. You look, how in the heck did we get where we are? If you could see, I mean, you know, one package I took down there, I actually had revenue. They said, we don't want to see that one. We want to see the ones that don't have revenue, because that way we can be more speculation. There'll be more speculation. Yeah, I mean, it was fun. I mean, and all of that goes back to the discipline that I got from my parents. Okay, my parents were very, I mean, I was the oldest in the whole family. All my cousins and brothers and all those, everybody else, I was the oldest. I was the one who got the discipline. But that discipline then carried me through Valley Forge Military Academy, as I said. I went there for 2 years, and then it carried me through life. And to this day, it still carries me, because, not because of the Army, but because of my parents instilling in me the discipline that was required in order to be successful. You know, and I believe in discipline, and to the point sometimes where I get myself in trouble because of that.
Tony, do you have any, excuse me, Ed, do you have any questions?
I got a couple of questions.
Sure.
Your background and mine ran similar paths. I was in college when I got drafted, and I know why I got drafted. You were in college and you got drafted. Why were you drafted out of college?
Well, okay, that's a great question. I've got the answer for you. I was actually thrown out of college.
I understand. I've been there.
Yeah. And when you grow up in the state of Rhode Island, there's only so many bodies to take. Okay, interesting story about that. My uncle, not the one who was the soldier, but the one who was the news director for the Providence Journal, which is the major, probably the only one now, major newspaper in the state of Rhode Island. He's very politically connected. So when I got kicked out of school and I got my draft notice, I was determined to be 4F because I had, quote, a heart murmur. Well, the state of Rhode Island at that time was running a scholarship program that if you were declared 4F, they would pay to send you to a specialist of your ailment. That specialist, if that specialist verified or what do you call it? Yeah, verified what the Army doctor said, or the doc, then they would give you a scholarship back to the school that you came from. Okay, so I go to what we call east side of Providence up there, Brown University. I go to this doctor and he goes, "Yeah, you got a heart murmur, healthy as a horse, 1A, boom, done." So because when you have such a small population as the state of Rhode Island, there's only so many people they can draft. So I went from 2S student to 4F to 1A in a matter of about 3 months. Boom, boom, boom. Thank you very much. You're out of here. Yeah, that's what happened to me. And so when I went back, it was kind of interesting because Jim Mallory, who was the dean of man when I got asked to leave the first time, he was still there. And so at the night that I turned over the Veterans Club to the new president, a guy by the name of Alan Batts, I looked at Mr. Mallory and I said, "Sir, you don't remember me, do you?" And I told him the story of what was the reason for me being asked to leave. And in the yearbook, it has a picture where he's pointing at me. That was you, because he didn't recognize me because we had changed so much in 8 years. I mean, the maturation process, the sense of purpose. I mean, when you came into the business department at East Carolina, 90% of us were veterans. I mean, we had so much power on campus. We started our own book exchange. So when you're sitting right next to the book exchange and you know how much money they'd rip us off for, I mean, if you got 50% of what you pay for that book, in our place, all you had to do is we would give you 50 cents. That's all we wanted to give to us. So you'd come up to me and say, "Okay, I got Econ 101. We'd register that book. We'd set it there. Somebody wants Econ 101. We'd say, "Okay, Ed, da-da-da-da," and give us 50 cents. That's all we took from the whole thing. We had some of the professors would come over and tutor us. We had test files. I mean, we were rocking. And if some of the guys got in trouble, they'd give me a call. I'd go down and talk to the chief of police, and we'd kind of work something out. I mean, we had it going on at East Carolina. As a matter of fact, we played intramural sports because a lot of us were too old to go to the fraternities, so we played intramural sports. While we were in intramural sports, the basketball was the toughest one for us because most of us couldn't run. So we got permission that we could just touch hands and the other guy could come in. Well, darn, if we didn't win that championship, and when we were going for the school trophy, for the president's trophy, they didn't have any place to take us because they didn't expect us to win. So I had to go see Leo Jenkins, who was the president at the time. I went to see Leo Jenkins. I said, "Sir, we got a problem." He goes, "I guess we do." He said, would you forgive us? I said, yes, sir. What other choice do we have? So, you know, go back 3 bags full, and we went back. But, you know, those are the kinds of things. And then East Carolina hired a general, a 3-star general, Air Force 3-star general, as a VA, I don't know what his title was, but he kind of worked with us to help us with any issues that we had as far as getting resettled back into the academic environment. But that's a long answer to your question, but that's how far.
Well, I wasn't carrying enough hours. That's why I was going to school part-time, and that's why I got drafted.
Oh, no, I was being an entrepreneur, and they didn't like my entrepreneurial opportunity.
I didn't. and another question, Joe asked me when I did my interview, and I was intrigued by something you said earlier in the interview, that your family was military all the way through, and you were the last one.
I'm the last one.
The last one, okay. Would you have gone in the military had you not been drafted?
Yes.
Okay. That
Yes.
was the same question you asked me.
Now, I have to amend that statement. I just remembered, my nephew just went in the Army. So there's a, let's see, he went in this year, and I went in 65, so that's a pretty big void, but that's.
I couldn't answer the question.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, I would. And I just feel that we have we're so lucky to be in this country.
Oh, absolutely.
And someone asked for a few years of your time, and the fact that I stayed for 23 years is not anybody else's reason but my own, even though I was active in reserve. You know, I had a great time. I was at the right place at the right time. I realized when I got to a certain point in my active duty career that I wasn't polished enough to continue to climb that ladder. And I said, this is the time for me probably to get out and become a civilian and stay in the reserves. And I went down 2 paths at the same time, and it worked out perfect for me.
Very good. That's okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we finish the interview, either to fill in any holes in the story you just told, or to send a message to anybody that's going to be watching this in the near future or down the road?
No, I really don't think I do. Again, you know, there's a lot more meat on those bones, but I had fun doing this interview. I came in here with a lot of anxiety. I had trouble sleeping last night because I really didn't know where this conversation was going to go. I have nothing to hide. There's no, I hate to use the term, there's no bodies laying around that I need to worry about being dug up. But I hope that when people see this, that they understand that the pictures they saw of Mitch Snyder, that colonel in Washington, D.C., walking around with the field jacket on and doing all the whining, that the guy in the Texas Tower was not a Vietnam veteran, he was Air Force, that the guy up at McDonald's who shot the people up, he was an Air Force guy, and the guy who blew up the post office out in Kansas City, none of those guys were troopers. They were all administrative pukes who used Vietnam as an excuse, but they were not soldiers. And I think that if you look at the people who are presidents and CEOs of corporations, I mean, I was president of a publicly traded corporation. I've been, you know, there's a lot of people out there. You've had big titles, I'm sure. I don't know your background. You probably had some titles as well. If you look around and see how many of us didn't whine, didn't sit around and mope, we just got back here, we did our job, we did what was necessary. If we needed a college education, we went and found a way to make that happen. Whether we had to work, whether we had the military, whatever. Most of my contemporaries at East Carolina when I was back there, they had to go jobs. So we had every morning slot we could get because they had to go to work that afternoon in order to support themselves to get back there because the GI Bill didn't cover enough of it. And I don't see that kind of, initiative. I don't see that kind of enthusiasm in the generations today. The generations today are so much of this entitlement that they think they should get it and give it to them. I see very few of them want to buckle down and work the way we did. And that's not we did it this way and we're the only ones that did it that way, because obviously there's exceptions. But when you look at the charts, and you go back 5 years maybe, because a lot of us are probably retired, a lot of them are probably retired by now, but you go back to where our average group was only 60, 63 years old, and see how many of us were officers of senior officers of publicly traded companies or that owned their own company. I think you'll see better than 95% of us were. And unfortunately, the window that people look at us through are the 5%, the Mitch Snyders of the world.
Yeah.
And the people who relate to those incidences that I just told you about. And that is something I wish we could change, and we can't.
Well, that's a wonderful message, and I think one way of changing it is just people hearing a story like yours and hearing exactly what you said, because what you said is so true, and what you did, again, in Vietnam and before and after Vietnam, they're all things that you should be proud of, because you've lived a good life and continuing to do it. And I particularly want to thank you for your service to the country, both being in the military, being in the Guard, and being in Vietnam for 2 tours. So thank you very much for your service, and thank you for coming here and telling us your story.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.